Hi, Bonnie. How are you, honey? Hi, Kay. Nice to see you. Glad to see you. Thank you for sharing. Hi, Jeff. Nice to see you here. Okay, so today I want to focus on healthcare issues. First, uh, one theme that has characterized the attack that's taking place on the Medicare for All proposals. One of the most effective attacks so far is actually connected to uh, the um, the unions, some of the unions, because there are some of the unions who are saying, please, we want to keep the health care we have now. We worked so hard to get it, and we like it so much that we want to keep it. So we want to be an exception to the rule, and we want you to allow us to keep it. And we're against the Medicare for All bills, okay, that are in the House, okay, and in the Senate, because they won't make exceptions for us. Uh, and these unions tend to say our health care, the health care we negotiated for ourselves, is better than the Medicare for All plan. So I want to address that. And the other thing I want to address is the coming attack on the NHS in the UK that is already being mounted now that it's clear that Boris Johnson has secured a resounding victory, which was actually primarily achieved based on the Brexit issue, but that doesn't change the fact since it was a general election, that he can have as much as a full 5 year term in office with a heavy majority in Parliament to do exactly what he wants to do, not only to the NHS, but to all kinds of other programs which exist in the UK. So I wanted to talk about that, okay, as well. And as usual, I'll use some articles to focus my commentary and my views on these issues. So, how's my sound, by the way? Everything okay, folks, before I go further? Any technical problems today? Anybody hearing any fan noise, for example? Bonnie says there's a little bit, okay, of echo. So I've tried to adjust for that. Please let me know if the sound quality is good. And please do share this one as much as you can without actually jeopardizing your status in Facebook. Kay says unions who oppose Medicare for All are nuts. Well, I tend to agree that there's probably something of a deficiency of knowledge there, that the rank and file within those particular unions probably don't know very much about the Medicare for All bill. They do know the health care they have now is actually pretty good. Uh, as for the union leaders in these particular unions, they have their own reasons. And those reasons are likely to be different, okay, in each of the unions. And they're not necessarily going to be straight up reasons. In other words, that they really think that the Medicare for All program will not be as good as what they have now. But anyway, let's consider these issues by looking at an article which appeared in Common Dreams. Let me get you to that article. On Friday, December 13th. It was written by Marcy Wells, who is a member of the culinary union, the culinary 226 union. And she entitled her article, which was originally published on Medium and run by Common Dreams, I have, quote, some of the best, unquote, health insurance a union member can get, but I would trade it today for Medicare for All. So that's the opinion of at least one union member, specifically Marcy Wells. And here's a picture of Senators Kirsten Gillibrand and Jeff Merkley, okay, with Bernie Sanders, while Bernie was introducing the Medicare for All Act of 2019. And they were two of Bernie's co-sponsors when he introduced his version, which is Senate Bill 1129. Okay, S 1129. Let me put this on clearly so you can see it better. Let me make the type a bit larger. And Marcy Wells says, I believe one job should be enough. I believe labor unions are the backbone of high productivity and a great quality of life. I'm a dues-paying member of Culinary 226 in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm on the contract committee and I'm a shop steward, all volunteer positions. I'm a waitress, a single parent, and a progressive activist. Workers' rights mean everything to me. After 16 years with this union, I am proud of what was accomplished before my time and hopeful about how we can continue to build on that. With a whopping 60,000 members, quote, this union that does politics, unquote, has been a community staple since its inception in 1935. Oh, gee, I didn't even know Las Vegas was there in 1935. Anyway, I attend every picket and rally that I can, even if I have to drag along my 7-year-old daughter. I'm a union girl through and through. When implemented correctly, unions are the biggest difference between justice and injustice on the job. I know for a fact that without the protection of my union contract, I would have been wrongfully terminated years ago for refusing to sacrifice my dignity along with my labor and time. After the Janus Supreme Court decision in 2018, I never even considered retracting dues or surrendering my membership. I believed that since I was always there for my union, they would always be there for me. And quote, I would trade my union insurance for Medicare for All today, unquote. Earlier this month, I attended a Bernie Sanders town hall held by the Culinary Union 226 in Las Vegas. I witnessed the paid organizer rallying a small group to heckle Senator Bernie Sanders. This was right after a stage question about how Senator Sanders would accommodate the union to keep our insurance during and after the implementation, okay, of Medicare for All, positing that all the members want to keep their union insurance instead, okay, of Medicare for All. For me, that couldn't be further from the truth. I need to speak from my own perspective since I have been erased from the conversation. Despite the uncanny familiarity of, quote, the Irishman, unquote, film, the promise of being shunned or worse by a huge portion of the 60,000, and the fact that I'm one of the few active people who work at my particular restaurant, I still won't cower in fear from fascism in any form, foreign or domestic. I would trade my union insurance for Medicare for All today. By Culinary 226 has a reputation for having some of the best health insurance in the city, and relatively speaking, it is, especially if you're an employee who rarely gets sick or doesn't have a chronic illness. I'm going to dispel some common myths and outline some reasons I would opt out of the Culinary Health Fund in exchange for Medicare for All. Out of pocket costs, quality of care, access to care, freedom of choice, and the perils of elitism. I live with chronic illness, and I've been somewhat successfully bootstrapping my way through symptoms for years. In 2019, I began to have bad flare ups. Because of the limitations of my insurance, I have not been given the recommended treatments, and I have missed an exorbitant amount of work and had a pretty shitty quality of life since then. I've been dealing with chronic bilateral uveitis. I think that's how you pronounce it, and the associated systemic fatigue and pain since January of 2019. It's now December, and I have yet to receive the systemic steroids, biologics, and the immunosuppressants I need. I have Advil and eye drops. I have encountered a maze of but of the bureaucracy, delayed diagnosis, and failure to treat. In the process, I spent more than I could afford for copays, diagnostic imaging tests, $125 to $175 each, and prescriptions, at least $800 this year so far. When you don't generate a sufficient amount of labor, the insurance isn't free either. This month, I owe $334 by the 31st, or I lose my insurance. I had to create a GoFundMe to subsidize my healthcare needs. $350 for the emergency room and being kept there overnight. $200 per visit to see an out-of-network doctor, and hundreds more to subsidize my upcoming travel to California to see a specialist so I don't lose my sight. It adds up. I need Medicare for all. Here are a few factors: a shortage of specialists in my city, too few specialists but being in the culinary network, and a generally apathetic nature of the healthcare system in uh, Nevada. The union mostly represents bartenders, food servers, housekeeping badasses, uh, bussers, dishwashers, and porters. These jobs are synonymous with manual labor at a very high volume. To say we will probably need medical care for connective tissue and orthopedic ailments is an understatement. However, when the Culinary Health Center was built, the rheumatologists and other specialists were removed from the network, despite the fact that there are no specialists or rheumatologists at the free clinic. I had an in-network rheumatologist literally refused to treat me and offer me an appointment 5 months away when I was referred to be treated immediately. My current ophthalmologist even called to advocate for me and was floored by the audacious negligence. This is a function of the for profit healthcare industry, and the culinary union insurance I have is part of that system. I've heard of programs and assistance, but after dozens of pleas for service, I'm exhausted. The damage is worse because this state has some of the most lax malpractice laws combined with the lowest reimbursement rates. You can figure out what type of talent that attracts to the city. When there is a competent doctor, they're booked to capacity or allow cash payments only. I wish my union consulted with members when speaking on our behalf concerning Medicare for all. To begrudge people the opportunity to remove their golden handcuffs if they so choose is cruel. Informed consent is solidarity. Lies, manipulation, and mob tactics are not the way. I need Medicare for all. Quote, if I had Medicare for all, I would probably be able to afford Christmas gifts for my kids this year instead of being the gift. If I had Medicare for all, I wouldn't have to travel to seek treatment or start a GoFundMe to expedite my treatment to avoid losing my job because I can't hold on to it much longer in this condition. Unquote. If I had Medicare for all, I would probably be able to afford. I'm sorry, that seems to be a repeat of what was said before. Okay, if I had Medicare for all, I wouldn't be on the chopping block at my job because they think I'm faking it or don't care either way. If I had Medicare for all, but then bias and delayed diagnosis or refusal of treatment would not be tolerated. We have to acknowledge the reality that for profit insurance asserts that if you don't work, you deserve what you get, up to and including death. Also, sick people don't actually deserve jobs. Sadly, the illusion of elitism lies at the core of this issue. For years, I would be hit with pangs of guilt when I told people outside of the union what type of insurance I had, and they wish they had good insurance too. Healthcare is a human right. Unfortunately, many of my fellow union members are echoing the quote, I paid off my student loans, so no one should get a loan forgiveness, unquote, trope. To their own demise uh, at that. I like the idea of a $200 yearly cap on prescriptions or not waiting almost 2 months to get a necessary diagnostic test because you can't afford it. Just a comment here. Of course, in H.R. 1384, the Jayapal bill, okay, that's in the House now. In that, the specific Medicare for All bill, there is a zero yearly cap on prescriptions. In other words, no copays for prescriptions at all. No pays either, and no balance billing. I want everyone to have great insurance. My nephew was born with Hirschsprung's Hirschsprung's disease and had 4 surgeries, including a colostomy, before he was 6 years old. There is no cure. His young mom works long hours to provide for him, in addition to making trips to Utah for him to get the best treatment. She owes thousands in deductibles that subtract from his care because she makes too much money to qualify for disability or Medicaid. He needs Medicare for all. Uh, Also, Medicare for all is a racial justice issue. It's an immigrant's right issue. It's a disability rights issue. It's a gender justice issue. It's a woman's rights issue. Women are less likely to have their doctors believe their symptoms. But black women have it much worse, which shows up in higher higher maternal mortality rates for black women, terminal illness, and chronic illnesses. The Culinary Health Fund is not exempt from trying to protect all of its members. I'm not part of the largest voting bloc among members, but I deserve to be valued and accommodated by my union too. Maybe this is what happens when your union leans more political than they should. It begs the question, what does my union have to gain from encouraging members to vote against their own interests? Question mark. And that's the end of the article. It's only one person's opinion, but given all the things she has to wait for, okay, given all the copays she has to make, it seems very, very clear to me that a Medicare for All bill like H.R. 1384, which has no premiums and no copays and also no deductibles, for all basic needs, okay, and basic care, and for all pharmaceuticals, and for all normal equipment needs for patients, is going to be a much superior health plan to the plan she describes, which requires thousands of dollars in copays each year. And she's not clear on the deductibles, but there may be some deductibles too. And she also may have some premiums taken out of her pay as well that she isn't calculating here. So the culinary union is a union that is evidently pretty famous for the quality of its health care and the success of its efforts to actually negotiate what, comparatively speaking, is very good care for its people. But still, judging on the evidence from this one case, it won't do what Medicare for All will do, which is give you all the care you need with no copays, no deductibles, also no premiums. And if you're a fairly low income person, okay, as she appears to be, the tax burden won't be very high either. So, all in all, for her, and probably for most other workers of that union, what they need is Medicare for all. Okay? And the union leaders, for some reason, okay, are not in favor of it. Now, some time ago, I also compared the UAW policies with what would be paid under the Medicare for All bill. And then, in the specific case of the UAW, it was also quite clear to me that even though that's generally considered among the best in the nation when it comes to health care, that even the UAW health care doesn't compare to Medicare for All, neither to the Sanders bill in the Senate nor to the Jayapal bill in the House, which is even better. Also, one thing about the UAW insurance was highlighted by a recent strike, okay, at GM, when the president of GM, to try to beat the strikers, simply went ahead and canceled their health insurance, saying the contract was no longer in effect. So she canceled their health insurance while the strike was actually going on. And so they had no health insurance because they decided to strike for a better deal. That should never happen. And it won't happen under Medicare for All. I think that's really pretty important. So in this fight, in this country, we're having a big fight with the neoliberals and people who sympathize with their cultural views over whether we can have a Medicare for All insurance program. In the UK, though, they have the National Health Service, which has been one of the best and most successful systems in the world for many, many years now, even in the midst of the attempts to starve the system by the Tories in the UK, since at least the crash and the reaction to the crash in 2010. Since then, they've been austerity mongering the NHS, and they've been trying to reduce its funds. Okay, and in the days, in the run up to the election, okay, the recent election that was won, of course, by Boris Johnson, he came up with promises about how many new hospitals they were going to get, how many new doctors, okay, and so on, okay, and how great the NHS was going to be under him. There seemed to be many factual errors and contradictions in what he had to say, but apparently the public in the UK swallowed it anyway, even though historically he had been a strong enemy of uh, the NHS. Okay, and even though he has a famous reputation as being a pretty thoroughgoing liar, so they still bought it, and they decided that he wasn't going to weaken, okay, the NHS. So, in the wake of that, there appears an article published on Friday, December 13th, written by Jake Johnson, a regular staff writer, okay, of Common Dreams. Title is Britons Gear Up to Defend NHS from the Privatisation Scheme of the Tories as they win a strong majority in the UK election. And the article says, after UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Tory party won a strong majority in the general election on Thursday, the British progressives mourned the utterly devastating quote unquote result and geared up for a fight to defend the National Health Service from more right wing budget cuts and privatization efforts. Quote, people running our NHS are crying out for more help, begging people not to vote Conservative due to the constant cuts, unquote, tweeted London-based activist Ellen Rose. Quote again, seems they were ignored by the people they try to save every day, unquote. Quote again, the fight goes on. This quote is from Hassan Patel. The fight goes on. We need to occupy every single space with our politics louder and stronger. Protest the privatization of the NHS. Defend the migrants. Fight evictions. Take care of your neighbors. Said Mr. Patel. Following his victory, which is expected to give the Conservatives a 75 seat majority, Johnson declared that the election result has granted him, quote, a powerful new mandate to get Brexit done. Now, he's right about that. Just 2 weeks before the vote, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn unveiled over 450 pages of documents that he said showed a Tory plan to privatize the NHS through negotiations with the US over a possible post-Brexit trade pact. And he said, mega corporations see Johnson's alliance with Trump as a chance to make billions from the illness and sickness of people in this country, unquote. Unquote again. And if the Conservatives have their way and this deal goes forward, the changes I revealed will be almost irreversible, unquote. As Common Dreams reported, documents obtained by the Daily Mirror last month showed that the U.S. pharmaceutical industry is lobbying uh, um, 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 is lobbying is pharmaceutical industry is about lobbying about the trade negotiators to open the British drug market as part of any new trade agreement. In a tweet Friday morning, U.S. President Donald Trump congratulated Johnson on his, quote, great win, unquote, and said, quote, Britain and the United States will now be free to strike a massive new trade deal after Brexit, unquote. That should be of concern to us too, because if the trade deal is at all a reciprocal trade deal, those things that the UK is prohibited from doing will also apply to us. There's a history of using trade deals to stop the governments of the world from adding social benefits to the social benefits they currently have. In other words, from expanding their safety nets. Quote, this deal has the potential to be far bigger and more lucrative than any deal that could be made with the EU, unquote, Trump added. Quote, celebrate Boris, unquote. Trump has previously insisted that, quote, everything, unquote, will be on the table in the uh, but, 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 in the trade um, negotiations with the UK, including the NHS. In a series of tweets early Friday, Guardian columnist but George Monbiot said, quote, mass resistance, unquote, and an organized movement will be necessary to protect the people in programs the UK's right-wing government is likely to target. Quote, we will defend our public services, especially the NHS, okay, from attempts to degrade or destroy them, and support, as well as we are able, the overworked heroes who keep them afloat. We will divide up the tasks, but always in the knowledge that we're working together. Love and courage to you all, unquote. And then there's the quote from Hassan Patel once again that I gave earlier. And supporters of the Medicare for All bill in the United States expressed solidarity with uh, the British progressives following Thursday's elections. Our friends in the UK are about to have to fight like hell to defend their National Health Service, said said Jacobin's Megan Day. Quote, we Americans who are fighting for Medicare for all will stand with you, unquote. I'm sure we will. But before this is over, we may all have to go into the streets to get what we want. We may have to all go into the streets and stay there. As things are beginning to get really pretty hairy when it comes to what the neoliberal governments of the world, okay, are willing to do to people. In country after country, it isn't pretty. but our resistance has to continue. So, let's see what you have to say today. Kay says unions who oppose Medicare for all are nuts. Yes, that's very true. Corporations use healthcare as a weapon against unions. Absolutely true. Kathy has joined, and Lana Dell has joined. Susan Eldridge has joined. Rob Rivera has joined. Rob says, "Hey Yoda." Hey Rob. How's it going? It's going great, Rob. Only last night, for some reason, I wasn't able to get to sleep, so I'm operating on very few hours of sleep right now. K. Clark Ryan says, "Oh, Jim Bird has joined." Hi, Jim. K. Clark Ryan says, "Here's something most people don't know till they read it. A Medicaid expansion here in Ohio means you can't have any more than $2,000 to qualify, which means that many seniors have to give up their own home and any money they might have in the bank and live like a pauper in low income housing." Kay says, "I just got out of low income housing. I can tell you it's awful. Bad water, full of bugs of all kinds, and mold too. Sad what people have to do to get sick care in this country." Yep, I know. I think if I knew what the future would hold for the United States, just how successful the Reagan program would actually become. But back in the 1970s, I think that I would have moved somewhere else, but to a country that is more civilized and kinder to its citizens. But I had no idea, that the United States could turn the way it has from the perspective of the early 1970s. I just had no idea things were going to go this way. If you had asked me if that time whether it was possible to get to where we are now, whether we possibly could have had someone like Trump, as president of the United States, I would have told you you had lost your senses back then. And for that matter, I probably would have said the same if you told me that we could have a Democratic president like Bill Clinton, or Obama. Uh, they both were so friendly to business, such sellouts to business. For that matter, I wouldn't have thought, that the Republicans could be as bad as they've been. Every Republican president, but since the 1970s, has been has been a worse president from the standpoint of the people and what has been done for ordinary people than Richard Nixon was. I mean, that was a thought that would have been unthinkable during the 1970s. We thought we had reached absolute rock bottom with Nixon. Amazing. Most countries will not take the people who really need to move because we don't have enough money, sadly. Yeah, that's true. But can't move to Canada. You have to have some money and you have to have some property. Okay, if you're older, it's easier to move. Okay, if you're in your 20s and 30s, of course. But if you're older, you have to have some means at that point. Any other questions or comments? Oh, what happened here? Sorry. While I'm waiting for any additional comments, please share, like, and subscribe. And please become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. If there are no other comments, and I'm going to say good night for tonight. And I'll be back to see you again on Monday during the 9 o'clock hour. Tomorrow, as usual, I won't be live streaming. So thank you very much for coming, and I'll see you soon.